Hello and welcome to Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. This is Cyrus coming at you with a second video tonight, and I'm talking about the skeptic death spiral. I've talked before about the tactics that closed-minded skeptics and debunkers use when they attack you based upon your interests in non-material concepts or the highly verifiable, highly objective, and very well documented phenomenon of life after death. So when you end up in these situations, maybe these videos can help you. This is Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics, where we talk about these types of things. If you don't like this stuff, if you are a skeptic, if you are a materialist, and you don't like what I have to say, then go ahead and hit that dislike button so I can know how many of you are out there. And no one is forcing you to stay on this channel, but if you want to stick around and possibly learn some things and become an open-minded skeptic, then please hang around. If you like what I have to say, then please hit that subscribe button, because I really need that help, because this is a tiny channel. Literally videos of girls with their pet cats will get 1,000 subscribers within a couple of weeks, but talking about secrets of the universe takes months and months of work, so a little bit different demographics. Need your help with that. To continue, so the skeptic death spiral. Previously I talked about the tactic that skeptics use where they cast a shadow, so they make up somebody suspicious of a subject, they generalize about the entire subject, and then they repeat. For example, this psychic was proven as a fraud, all psychics are frauds, and then they find another example, and then again repeat, generalize, cast a shadow, and this convinces people not to take the subject seriously. Very intellectually dishonest. When you're dealing with agenda-driven skeptics, a second tactic they will use that unsuspecting people will fall into is the skeptic death spiral. So the tactic here is that, first of all, they are unwilling to ever accept something as being true. So a true open-minded skeptic would say, hey, you know what? I don't believe this is real, but there is evidence that it's real. You know, I'm not really quite there yet. I don't think there's quite enough evidence. It is interesting stuff I'm willing to look at. You know, just not there yet. But I respect the fact that you think that there's something there, because I know a lot of people do. But, I'm not quite there yet. That is how a normal, healthy-minded skeptic is going to react. But when you deal with these agenda-driven skeptics, it's a little bit like the analogy of a meme I just saw recently of Agent Smith from The Matrix. So in the film, and this is an analogy, when somebody is disrupting the Matrix that people live in, there was this artificial intelligence called Smith who will possess somebody's body and then kill you, and or attack you. And then when it's done, the person they possessed is now gone, they're dead, and Smith fades away to go off and continue the Agent Smith program. So it's a little bit like that. People are so brainwashed by mainstream academia and basically just the system that it's like they have this programming inside of them, some people anyway, that as soon as they hear something that goes against that narrative, then they attack. If you want to see a whole hive of people like this, then go to your friendly neighborhood Reddit subreddit like Science, reddit.com/r/science. If you dare to bring up a paratopic or belief in even something as so well documented by now like telepathy, then you will be immediately attacked by these people. So I'll keep that Rick and Morty image down here, I think. So, the skeptic death spiral, basically their mission is just to exhaust you. They'll never accept that anything could be real. And what they'll do is focus on a tiny portion of a study and then put all their energy in that. For example, let's say, there's a Paris study, and 90% of it's really interesting, and 10% is kind of like sloppy evidence or wasn't conducted properly. Instead of acknowledging the 90%, they focus all their energy on the 10% and then they never stop. So they will never be satisfied just because of this one thing that wasn't perfect. So they demand absolute perfection from whatever it is that you're presenting. And it's very effective because outsiders will look at that and they will think that that tiny, tiny thing they're focusing on is relevant when it's not. As an example, I was recently debating with a closed-minded skeptic who I would say is kind of like a halfway materialist. So there's actually a lot of skeptics who accept things like psi as well as multiverse theory. Like they can't deny all the evidence, and they may come up with their own kind of wild theories about all of it, but they refuse to acknowledge what the evidence actually means. For example, near-death experiences, the context is people are going into the afterlife, meeting deceased loved ones or meeting their higher selves. But one of these kind of like psi-based skeptics will look at that and only acknowledge like that there's like a expansion of consciousness or something like that, but they won't acknowledge the afterlife part of it. So one such guy is, of course, I've mentioned this guy a lot, Anthony Peake. And so he does not believe, for example, in spirits or spirit communication, and will insult you and call you a New Ager if you so much as suggest all of this research is correct. But he writes lots of books about psi and multiverse theory, and his whole idea that we have to, relive our life over and over again is really kind of grim version of the afterlife without the afterlife context associated. But anyway, so I was debating him about the skull experiments. Now, Peake, unlike a lot of the closed-minded skeptics, actually has a lot of integrity because he researches, he reads the material, he engages with it, rather than just being completely armchair criticism. But that said, if you're operating from this tactic, it doesn't matter how much you read and research. The goal, what you're trying to do is find whatever is flawed, because there's always flaws, there's always imperfections, nothing is perfect, and then drill down and only focus on that. So the skull experiments, basically he was bringing up that there was a photograph anomaly where, by the way, let me back up. The skull experiments were a physical mediumship experimentation type practice that occurred for about 4 years in the 90s. And involved a lot of paraphenomena that was occurring. So you had mainstream scientists as well as SPR investigators coming in to research what was happening over the course of years. Might have been 2 years, it might have been 4, I'm not sure. But people like Montague Keen helped write the Skull Report, which is favorable that there was real para stuff happening. In the effort, because I think that the skull experiments actually threatened these closed-minded skeptics. It's like, it made a lot go into full Agent Smith mode, full-on attack, so that the Skull Report was picked apart by people, basically like a bunch of vultures picked it apart to find what could be used to create this prosecutor's argument against it all. Which again, you can do this for anybody. You can find the great American novel, and you can pick it apart to find a way to criticize the author and make it look horrible if you are bent on that agenda. So this is what happened. The issue being that there was some issues with photographs. So spirits claiming they're going to produce original photographs, it was discovered those photographs were already in existence. So they're using this to say that there was fraud taking place. One photograph allegedly looked photoshopped, although in the mid-90s there really wasn't photo editing software available to any practical level. I mean, there was like Photoshop version 0.5 or something like that, maybe 1.0. But, we had the Photoshopped argument. And another phenomenon happened which was highly evidential, which was that the researchers would come in to the seances with undeveloped film canisters and in sealed containers, and then they would leave the seance after communicating with spirit entities coming in, and there'd be the film, they'd open the film, and it would be they develop it. There'd be messages on the film for them, highly evidential. Um, Also, I mean, so much stuff happened in Skull. There were like spirit lights appearing. They were caught on camera. They would enter crystals and illuminate the room. They would fly into people's bodies to help heal sicknesses. All kinds of really interesting stuff happened with Skull. I encourage people to go check it out. But now, we're dealing with someone possessed by Agent Smith, has to shoot it down, and they're going to ignore the 95% of the material and just only focus on those elements that would call it into question among people watching or viewing the debate. So the skeptic death spiral is that they'll just continue harping on those things and they'll never stop. And not until the opponent becomes exhausted, they'll just keep going at this. And if you can't provide a sufficient explanation for those weaknesses they found, then they believe that the whole case can be thrown out. It's now debunked. But that's the funny thing, is that in science, nothing is perfect, and there's always flaws, there's always issues, there's always things that are, that are imperfect, and it's only these people who demand absolute perfection to be able to accept any of the evidence as pointing in a direction. If you fall into a skeptic death spiral with these people, you will never win, because again, you can do this about anything. Okay, any experiment. Okay, you can make a freaking one of those like geology class little volcanoes with baking soda, and then you can say, well, the baking soda was old, and as you can see, the foam that came up out of the volcano was really negligible. And so, I'd say that this whole experiment was a failure. You can find anything, and then you can attack it, and you can pick it apart. So the death spiral tactic, it's kind of like in a boxing match when someone is just good at avoiding blows and taking punches. Their idea is to exhaust the opponent until the opponent just can't fight anymore, and then you go in for the kill. So my advice about the death spiral is this. So it's an agenda-driven tactic. They will pretend to have objectively looked at the evidence, but the whole time they, even if they did the research, the whole time they're focused on just, engaging in this tactic to only reaffirm their own doubt and then cast shadow and continue their agenda. Since you will not win, it's a bit of a mistake to keep going, to keep fighting, but what you can do is bring to the attention of the audience that what's being done. Let them know that what's being focused on is misrepresentative, and address the audience instead. Tell the audience, tell whoever's watching, other people on the forum, other people at the dinner table, God forbid, wherever this is happening, let them know. Address them. I'd like everybody to understand that there's much more to the story than this. As you can see, this represents a tiny, slim area of evidence, and don't take this guy's word for it. So this is a fatal blow to the agenda-driven skeptic, because you've unmasked what's really going on. They don't care about being convinced. They're already convinced. They just want to attack you and prop themselves up and continue the narrative that they want to push. You can unmask that by realizing that what's actually at stake are the third parties watching. So the people watching the debate, that's who you're convincing. It's the audience, it's the jury. So address the situation to them, and stop trying to convince the agenda-driven skeptic, because it won't go anywhere. So, and then bail out. Don't keep the death spiral going, because you won't accomplish anything. So I guess that's some final points about this. It's kind of like when you're dealing with skeptics. Skeptics, they have an inability to comprehend these subjects, right? But the difference is that these types of skeptics, the ones who are very, very hostile against you, they feel it is their mission to make the world see things the way they do, and they're part of subcultures where they all gain acceptance by doing this type of thing. Again, I mentioned that Reddit, our science. If you mention even a little bit of support for something that is non-materialist, they will attack your ass. And they get a level of satisfaction. So it's going into deep carnal levels of psychology, of acceptance, being part of groups and such. So it's not your job to dissect all of that. But if you end up in these situations, this is just something to keep in mind about how to deal with it. Now, I don't go seeking after these situations or these debates. I don't like being in these types of debates. I prefer, not ending up in these situations, but the reality is sometimes this stuff happens. Sometimes you will deal with these people. And that's my final point. People who accept the objective evidence, for example, of the afterlife, who can see the big picture, we have to have more teeth. We have to become better fighters, and we have to show that we're not the weak ones. Because these same people, and I've seen Peak do it, I've seen other skeptics I've dealt with do it, they and their groups and their little echo chambers will denigrate the people who actually accept the afterlife, accept after-death contact, accept these experiences. They will denigrate them as being weak-minded, as opposed to how superior and strong-minded they are, because they're willing to look at and accept the afterlife data, whereas they believe that their side is superior because they don't need to be consoled. They've accepted the cold, harsh reality of death, and they're stuck in that matrix, in that programming that death is terrible and there is no afterlife. Now they can cast a shadow upon all of the weak-willed. They may say New Agers, for example, who think otherwise, and which is, I think, is kind of funny because, for example, I rail against the New Age movement. I rail against people who just believe anything, whether it's flat Earth people, the solipsists, or people who think that Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy are in heaven because negative actions don't exist. Like, people who just accept anything that they read. I rail against those people, but to the debunkers and the skeptics, they'll use the New Age derogatory term if somebody is willing to accept spirit communication or something that's highly verifiable. So that's another way they cast shade on people. But instead of buying into that narrative or accepting, oh, I must be weak-willed because I believe these subjects, no, I think we have to fight. We have to fight for these subjects because it's not weak-willed to accept these things. We're going against the mainstream. It's not courageous by any means to support the mainstream narrative that death is non-existence. It takes courage to bust out of that mold and look at the evidence. So the courageous ones are the people willing to do that, but it's the cowards who hide behind the status quo and throw rocks at everybody and claim that they are the strong ones. It's not the case, and we have to prove that. This is Cyrus. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this stuff, then this is afterlifetopics.com. You can check out my books like Understanding Life After Death. I talk a lot more about the subject there. And its sequel, The Afterlife and Beyond, which is on, again, paperback or Kindle. You can pick it up there on the website. If you want to become a subscriber and get access to lots of cool archive classes, one-on-one with me, like anytime you want, I'll do that for people who subscribe. You can click Afterlife University up here at afterlifetopics.com. You can join the Facebook group where we have well over 8,000 people discussing these subjects all the time. And that's it for this video. I hope this was useful to you. Let me know in comments what you thought. If you've ever dealt with people like this, if you know what the skeptic death spiral is, how you handle these situations, leave comments down below. And that's it. I will catch you guys on the next video.